This 73-year-old lady could no longer live in her cottage because her children decided to admit her to a nursing home. So she wanted to donate her simple dwelling to a black homeless man who had always helped her, but her children prevented it. When the homeless man managed to enter the cottage, what he found inside left him astonished. Since her husband's death, Eleanor had been living alone in a cottage in Georgia. She'd managed to take care of herself throughout her life, but now it was becoming increasingly challenging. At the age of 73, she still tried to keep the place clean and well-maintained, but her strength and health were not what they used to be. When the phone rang, her oldest son was on the other end, once again insisting that it was time for her to agree to move to a nursing home. There, she would have healthcare professionals to attend to her, activities to pass the time, and other people to interact with. Eleanor listened to all the arguments and finally decided that it was okay. She could live in a nursing home. But she wanted to know what they planned to do with her cottage and the small piece of land around it, a space she had cared for with great affection for almost her entire life. Her oldest son suggested they could sell the place, and the money could be all Eleanor's. The youngest son suggested renovating and renting the place, generating monthly income for the family. Eleanor listened carefully to the ideas, but she was sure she had a better solution: donating the cottage as it was to Marcus, a nearby homeless man. Marcus had always shown himself to be a good man to Eleanor, and she wanted to help him in some way. Her children did not like the idea at all and did not trust Marcus, but out of respect for Eleanor's age, they said they would see what was possible. What neither Marcus nor her family knew was that Eleanor would leave something in the cottage far more valuable than the house itself. Marcus had already turned 60. He lost his wife a decade ago, and as a result of that mourning, he developed depression that greatly hindered his life. It was on the streets that Marcus and Eleanor met 3 years ago. Eleanor was coming back from the market carrying several bags. Suddenly, one of the bags burst and the fruits rolled into the street. Seeing that it was an elderly woman, Marcus hurried and gathered all the fruits, also managing to get another bag for her from a nearby store. After that, Marcus excused himself and took the rest of the bags the old lady was holding, saying, "Leave it to me. I'll take everything for you." Marcus had no idea that this encounter would change his life forever. Since then, Marcus constantly helped Eleanor when she went shopping or when the cottage needed minor repairs. Despite much insistence on Eleanor's part, Marcus never accepted any amount of money as payment. He noticed that the lady lived entirely alone and without luxuries, and he was just extremely grateful whenever he received a piece of cake with a cup of coffee made by the magical hands of Mrs. Eleanor, as he himself said. Over the years, the two loners became friends, and the old lady even invited him to dinner at her house. They respected each other, and Marcus listened attentively to all the lady's advice. Eleanor even noticed that his symptoms of depression had attenuated. On his part, Marcus felt useful when the lady needed his help in any way. The day Marcus learned that Eleanor was going to a nursing home, his heart tightened. Eleanor revealed that for the past 2 years, her children had been constantly calling her almost every day, insisting that she leave the cottage and the land, and she no longer had the strength to deal with this family pressure. As far as Eleanor was concerned, she would live until her last day in the cottage she built with her husband Harold. But in this life, not all our wishes can be fulfilled, can they? The resigned lady said. Marcus hugged his friend and assured her that she could always count on him if she needed any help. He thanked her for everything she had done, giving him a chance to feel the taste of friendship and trust again to try to get out of his homeless situation. It didn't take even 2 weeks, and Eleanor did go to the nursing home. The family made all the preparations without even consulting her. They wanted everything to be quick and uncomplicated, avoiding debates and confrontations of ideas with her. Marcus didn't even see Eleanor move. He just sensed that she must have moved because he never saw her in town again. Occasionally, he still went to the cottage just to check if everything was in order. In one of these rounds, Marcus was lucky to see Eleanor's children in the cottage. He approached and introduced himself. He asked about where his friend was, and the eldest son drove him away, saying that he wouldn't act like his mother, giving him money for liquor or financing any other vice the man had. Marcus didn't expect this kind of rudeness from Eleanor's children, who were as polite as Eleanor, and he was silent for a moment. Somewhat disoriented, he asked again where she was, but besides not answering, the children chased the man off the property, saying it was better for him not to appear there anymore, or they would call the police. Marcus was feeling bad, but he wouldn't let that behavior keep him away from his friend. Since the children didn't say which nursing home Eleanor was in, he would find out on his own. He went to the city's homeless shelter and asked the caretaker if there was a list of nursing homes he could consult. That way, he discovered that there were only 4 nursing homes. 2 of them were downtown, one in a more distant neighborhood, and the 4th was even farther away, on the outskirts of the city. But that didn't matter. He would walk as much as necessary to find Eleanor. He took a shower at the shelter and left early the next morning. The first 2 nursing homes were close to the shelter where he stayed, but Eleanor wasn't in either of them. He walked for another 40 minutes and reached the 3rd home. There was indeed a Margaret there, but it wasn't his Eleanor. So Marcus walked for another hour until he reached the main road that would lead to the last nursing home on his list. Marcus kept walking. He hitchhiked the entire way, but no one stopped to help him. About 3 hours later, Marcus finally saw the nursing home and went towards it, already quite tired and thirsty. He was no longer a young man either. Upon entering the place, he thought it was now or never. She could only be there. At the reception, he didn't even ask if there was a Margaret there. Confidently, he arrived saying that he would like to visit Margaret, who moved a few days ago. The receptionist hesitated for a moment, but confirmed that yes, Margaret was there. Then Marcus asked to see her, claiming to be her brother. He had to lie, because he knew that being just a friend wasn't enough for these companies to let him in. They warned him that the visiting hours were almost over, but he could see her quickly. So they took him to the room, and he was speechless with what he saw. His friend was lying down and looked sick. He had never seen her so fragile. But when Eleanor saw that it was Marcus at the door, her eyes lit up, and she opened a sincere smile. Marcus approached slowly. He was still analyzing Eleanor's situation, but the old lady was in a hurry, gesturing for him to come closer soon, and said, "Don't waste time. I have something to tell you." The man sat beside her and helped her sit up. She leaned towards him and whispered something in his ear that made Marcus shiver. "Is this serious? Is it serious?" he asked, totally disbelieving what he had heard. Eleanor patted his cheek, then squeezed his hand and said, "Yes, it is. It's yours, and everything inside it is for you too. Everything." After some time, a nursing home employee informed that the visiting hours were already over and Marcus had to leave. He didn't know what to think of what Eleanor had said, but he was a bit sad to see her in such a fragile state. She didn't seem like the same independent and determined elderly woman he knew. Perhaps the change was very recent, and she hadn't gotten used to it yet. Before leaving, he looked over his shoulder and saw Eleanor smiling. He still didn't know, but that was the last time he would see his friend. The next morning, Marcus gathered the last coins he had and bought a simple bouquet of flowers. He walked the entire route again to the nursing home. Upon arriving, he found out that his friend had died that night. He wasn't prepared for that news, and it took a while for it to sink in. He cried right there, and the receptionist wanted to know if he hadn't been notified by his brother because the family had already been notified during the night. The man didn't answer, just moved away, letting the tears wash his face. Marcus headed back to the cottage that was now his, according to Eleanor's last words. Despite this, he didn't seem happy. A copy of the key was hidden in the same place Eleanor had mentioned, so he had no trouble entering. He wanted to be happy with the gift, but he couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor. At that moment, it was just an empty house. He decided to make coffee, just like Eleanor had made for him before. He opened the highest cabinet in the kitchen and looked for where the coffee powder was. There was a cardboard box in front of the coffee, and when trying to remove it, the box fell straight to the floor, making a considerable noise. When picking it up, He noticed that it was a heavy box and therefore decided to open it to make sure nothing belonging to his friend was broken. Seeing what was in the box, Marcus was completely breathless. There were many bundles of money, an amount that the man had only seen in movie briefcases. He put everything on the table and stared for several minutes, thinking about what it meant. There were more than 40 bundles of $10,000 each, totaling almost $500,000, a fortune that Marcus never imagined having in his lifetime. He remembered that Eleanor had confirmed to him that the cottage and everything inside it were his. Still, he hesitated. But in the end, he gathered all the bundles into an old, frayed leather bag and went to the door. He knew exactly what to do. In the following days, Marcus made a modest renovation in the cottage, just enough to make it more presentable, without removing the original features created by Eleanor and her husband. He selected the personal items left by the former resident and arranged them in the space as if it were a museum exhibition. On the living room wall, he hung a beautiful photo of Eleanor and placed a lit candle just below. Marcus wasn't doing this because of the property she left him or the money he found, but because he wanted to show how much he valued the friendship he had with that lady. It took only a matter of days for Eleanor's 2 children to arrive at the cottage and come face to face with Marcus living there. They asked what he thought he was doing there, and Marcus was honest. He explained that he had visited Eleanor in the nursing home before her death, and she had left the cottage and everything inside it to him. The children thought Marcus, besides being homeless, had mental problems. How could a property like that, which belonged to their parents, be given away so easily to a homeless man they didn't even know? Marcus regretted that they didn't believe his story, but insisted it was true. He lamented even more that they were Eleanor's children and had no idea about their own mother's last wishes. Upon hearing this, Eleanor's younger son wanted to go after Marcus. He only stopped short of grabbing him by the collar because his older brother restrained him, saying that if he laid a hand on that man, they would lose their reason and it could harm them legally later. Finally, he said he would resolve it in the most civilized way by calling the police, and that's what he did. A police car with 2 officers arrived at the cottage in less than 20 minutes. After learning what was happening, the police informed Marcus that he needed to show some document proving that his version of the story was true. It could be a digital recording, a will, or a letter signed by Eleanor. Marcus had nothing but her word. In that case, the police told him he had to leave immediately. The younger son stepped forward and stated that even if the homeless man left the residence, he had invaded the place, and that couldn't go unpunished. Therefore, he would like to file a complaint and thus hoped to get that man out of circulation once and for all. Marcus was extremely hurt by all of this. Children who didn't respect their own mother's wishes. He couldn't hold back the tears and just asked for a few moments to gather his personal belongings. Noticing that the cottage was indeed cleaner and in better condition, the older son granted the man a few minutes. Marcus then took his old blanket that was resting on a chair, placed it inside the old faded leather suitcase, covering what was already inside. Before leaving, he took a look at the shrine he had prepared for his friend and surrendered to the authorities without causing any more trouble. He didn't want to give Eleanor's children more ammunition or worsen his situation. Despite the unfavorable scenario for him, Marcus was not foolish. He already had a good idea of what to do. Eleanor's children had no idea what would happen in the next few weeks. Eleanor's younger son did not withdraw the charges, and when he arrived at the police station, Marcus was not arrested only because he had no criminal record. Still, he was instructed to quickly find a public defender to represent him in the process. When released, Marcus went to the shelter, where he spent his nights and spoke with the caretaker. He asked for a recommendation for a law firm, and the only thing the caretaker did was point to an ad in the city's service book. Eleanor's children wasted no time. They obtained a restraining order against Marcus to prevent him from approaching the cottage and put it up for sale for $84,000. They didn't even bother removing furniture, decorations, or personal items from inside. Selling the place was the priority. A week passed, and a lawyer named Charles Winter contacted Eleanor's children. He expressed interest in the property and wanted to know if it could be used as a vacation home. The children didn't object to the idea, but mentioned that there were other interested buyers, so whoever made the best offer would get the property. Charles wanted to know what the highest offer had been so far. The older son revealed that a potential buyer had offered $90,000 to be paid in 3 separate deposits. Charles fell silent on the other end of the line for a moment, as if calculating or considering if it was really worth entering that auction. When he spoke again to Eleanor's children, he said he offered $91,000 in cash, full payment, provided the deal concluded as soon as they hung up the phone. The 2 children didn't need to think about the proposal. They accepted and scheduled the completion of the transaction for 7 days later, exchanging money for the house key. The 2 children celebrated the sale and announced that they would use the time to dispose of all the junk left by the former occupant of the cottage. Charles, however, said it wasn't necessary. If their idea was to get rid of what was in the cottage, he was willing to pay $1,000 more to leave it as it was. Greedy, Eleanor's children then said the deal would be closed for $92,000 and nothing would be removed from the place. 7 days after the phone negotiation, Eleanor's 2 children went to the cottage to conclude the sale of their parents' house, a luxury sedan parked with 2 occupants. A man aged between 40 and 50 in a suit stepped out of the driver's seat. He quickly introduced himself as lawyer Charles Winter. The passenger remained in the vehicle. After exchanging greetings, Charles and Eleanor's children began the transaction. The lawyer opened the suitcase and showed several bundles of money. He then handed the suitcase to the younger of the siblings. He counted the money and nodded positively to the older brother, who then passed an envelope with documents and the house key. "Congratulations, Charles. This is your new vacation home," he said. But Charles extended his arm with an open hand and said, "Don't congratulate me, gentlemen. The true owner of this admirable cottage is not me." Eleanor's children looked at each other in surprise, not understanding what was happening. "I'm just the negotiator," Charles said. At that moment, the second occupant of the luxury sedan got out of the car. He was also wearing a suit with a well-groomed beard and hair, shiny and impeccable shoes. Eleanor's children had the impression that they knew him from somewhere, but none of them was sure. When the man stood squarely in front of them, Eleanor's children realized it was Marcus, the homeless man. "This is the gentleman buying the property. All the money in the suitcase is his. Please complete the handover of the keys and documents to him, gentlemen." The children didn't know what to do. They didn't know if they should feel deceived or humiliated, but indeed there was money in the suitcase, and it was the agreed-upon amount. The older son saw no alternative but to hand over the key and envelope, but he did so with a look of profound anger. Marcus accepted, handed the envelope to Charles, and kept the key. "You never knew your mother's true wishes," he said. "You did everything to keep me away from her and what was left of her, but apparently she knew her children well and left the necessary conditions for me to ensure her will would be done." Except for the lawyer, no one knew what was happening and how that homeless man had obtained that money. Little did they know they were receiving a portion of their own mother's money. Now, Marcus could legally keep the cottage. "I will live in this cottage and respect everything Eleanor and her husband built. See you in court. Use this money to hire a good lawyer for the lawsuit you filed against me. You'll need it," Marcus said. "Now get off my property or I'll have to call the police." With these words, Marcus left Eleanor's children behind and closed the cottage door behind him. He relit the candle below Eleanor's photo, and that night he had a peaceful and restorative sleep in his new home.